Greetings, fellow survivors. If you're reading this, it means you're still holding on, somewhere out there above or below the chaos that has swallowed our world whole. I don't know if there will ever be an end to this nightmare, but I do know one thing. We have to keep sharing our stories. Maybe, just maybe, our voices can hold back the darkness a little longer. My name is Mark Ramirez, and I'm a SWAT hostage negotiator. Or at least I was. Now, I'm just another person trying to survive a situation none of us ever imagined. This is how it happened to me during the first 12 hours of the zombie outbreak. My shift started the same way it always did. Check equipment, go over daily briefings, and prepare for any high-risk operation. I'd been working as a hostage negotiator for a specialized SWAT unit in our city for about 5 years. The job demanded intense focus, empathy, and nerves of steel. People always assumed it was about smooth talking, but honestly, it was much more about listening. Even criminals in the middle of a standoff want to feel like someone hears their fear. At approximately 8 p.m., we received a call that changed my life forever. There was a reported hostage situation on the 25th floor of a high-rise office building downtown. At first, it felt like any other urgent mission. No one had mentioned anything strange yet. Our commanding officer put me and a small team in a transport to the location. Along the way, we picked up chatter on the radio about multiple disturbances around the city. Some were describing people acting erratically. Others mentioned sightings of individuals with bizarre injuries staggering in the streets. We didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe we were too focused on the call at hand. When we arrived at the high-rise, the atmosphere already felt unusual. Police vehicles were scattered around the entrance, lights spinning but sirens off like they'd been abandoned in a hurry. One of the patrol cars still had its driver's door open, keys in the ignition. I stepped out of our transport, and my boots crunched on broken glass. The wide lobby windows were shattered, and a faint alarm was chiming somewhere inside. The air smelled stale and metallic, making me uneasy. Before we could even set foot into the building, we got a radio call from dispatch. They told us quite bluntly that something was happening all over the city, reports of widespread attacks and a possible contagious threat. The word infected crackled over the comm, followed by a sharp burst of static. Then the line went dead. We tried to get more information, but the radio only hissed back at us. Despite the uncertainty, we still had a job to do. Hostages were potentially at risk on the 25th floor, and our instructions were clear. Secure the area, rescue civilians if possible, and gather information. We had no idea we were walking into a citywide nightmare. The broken lobby was dark except for intermittent emergency lighting. I led our small team of 4 toward the main elevator bank. Glass crunched under every footstep, and the entire space echoed with each breath we took. We called out to see if anyone needed help, but only silence greeted us. A desk in the middle of the lobby looked like it had been overturned. Papers were scattered everywhere, and spilled coffee formed dark stains on the marble floor. We found the elevator panel glowing an eerie green. Initially, we wanted to use the stairs, standard protocol in a hostage situation. But we discovered the stairwell doors were jammed from the inside. It looked like someone had tried to barricade themselves in or out. After several attempts, we realized we couldn't force the doors open without making a tremendous amount of noise, which could put us at a disadvantage if there was a well-armed suspect above. Reluctantly, we decided to use the elevator. I pressed the button, half expecting it not to work, but the doors slid open smoothly. We stepped inside, hearts pounding, each of us trying to mentally prepare for whatever was waiting upstairs. Our team was composed of me, an expert marksman named Taylor, a tactical specialist named Cross, and a field medic named Levinson. We'd trained together for months, rehearsing all kinds of scenarios, but nothing like this. As the elevator rose, the overhead light flickered in and out, casting weird shadows on the walls. In the silence, we could all hear each other breathing. Then came a distant rumble from somewhere below. The building shook slightly. It felt like something had crashed or exploded nearby. The lights went out momentarily, and my stomach dropped as the elevator slowed. For a few seconds we all held our breath, expecting to be trapped, but it lurched back into motion. We arrived on the 25th floor to an unsettling silence. The corridors stretched in both directions, lit only by red emergency lamps. Several doors were ajar, the offices behind them dark. Right away we noticed the walls had strange streaks on them, as if something had brushed up against the surfaces while stained with dark fluid. A few scattered footprints led toward a corner office, then vanished. My mind raced with possibilities. Someone had been bleeding or carrying something, maybe the result of a violent struggle. Our radio crackled, but only static came through. No sign of the hostages, no sign of any suspect, and no immediate sign of a typical standoff. We carefully made our way through the corridor, calling out that we were SWAT, instructing any civilians to stay calm and announce themselves. All we heard were faint thuds from somewhere below, muffled by the floors between us. It was like the building itself was groaning under an invisible weight. We found a large conference room with chairs overturned and a table pushed against the windows. Paper was scattered everywhere, some with footprints across them. On one of the walls I noticed deep scratches, a pattern of frantic marks, like someone clawed in desperation. I had never seen anything like that in all my years. My heart was hammering. Even though we had no direct contact with the hostage taker, something told me we were too late. Taylor, our marksman, moved ahead to secure an open office door. The rest of us followed close behind, each step measured. As we swept the room, Taylor suddenly froze. I saw him motion with 2 fingers, signaling he saw someone. Slowly we approached. A figure was hunched in the far corner, next to a tipped-over filing cabinet. At first, the figure appeared to be a person in tattered office clothing, leaning against the wall, arms limp at their sides. I identified myself, but got no response. That's when I noticed the shallow breathing and odd twitching of their shoulders. I inched closer and realized the individual's skin was damp with sweat, and their eyes were unfocused. They made no move to stand up or speak. It was like they were trapped in some trance. Levinson, our medic, quietly stepped forward to check for injuries. As soon as he moved in, the figure let out a low moan, a sound so unsettling it made my hair stand on end. In one swift motion, the person lunged forward, swinging an arm in a wide arc. Levinson narrowly dodged the grab. Taylor stepped in, firmly telling the figure to remain still, but it showed no understanding. Instead, it turned toward Taylor, making a ragged hissing sound, and charged. All of us reacted on pure training, pulling the figure away to prevent it from harming us. Cross managed to restrain them, but they continued snapping and flailing. Their pupils were so dilated that their eyes looked entirely dark, and there was an acrid smell coming off them, like something beyond just sweat or fear. I had never seen anything like it. Realizing that we might be dealing with a highly infected individual, we tried to communicate calmly. No response, only more hissing and frantic attempts to break free. Eventually, Cross had to restrain them by tying the person's wrists with a makeshift rope from a broken phone cord. It was the only way to stop them from thrashing. We knew we had to move. That person's behavior was alarming, and we still had no clarity on the hostage situation. Perhaps other people in the building were also in danger. With every passing minute, the moans from the figure in the corner escalated. It sounded like they were in a trance, not even aware of their surroundings. Suddenly, a shriek echoed from somewhere outside the room, followed by frantic footsteps. We quickly formed up, weapons at the ready, and moved back into the corridor. A man wearing an office ID badge sprinted past. He didn't even notice us at first. He was just running, tears streaming down his face. I called after him, but before he could respond, something leaped from a side hallway, another infected. It tackled the running man to the ground. The 2 figures rolled across the floor, locked in a terrifying struggle. The infected attacker was clearly not thinking like a normal person, displaying an unnatural level of aggressiveness. The pinned man screamed for help, arms flailing. We moved to intervene as swiftly as possible. Cross managed to pull the attacker away while Taylor helped the pinned man to his feet. That's when I saw the bite. The attacker's teeth had torn into the man's arm. The wound wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening in a normal situation, but it looked ominous. Blood formed a ring around the bite mark, and the man held his arm as if it were on fire. He stared at us wide-eyed and kept repeating, "They said it's contagious. Oh, no, no, no." We guided the bitten man into a nearby office and tried to calm him down. He was shaking uncontrollably. Fear etched into every fiber of his being. Through ragged breaths, he told us that floors below were filled with individuals acting the same way, biting, clawing, and attacking anyone they could. He used the word zombies. I remember how bizarre it sounded coming from an otherwise ordinary office worker. He explained that the entire building had erupted into chaos sometime after the first few infected appeared. People fled to higher floors, hoping to lock themselves in. Security guards tried to maintain order, but were overwhelmed. All phone lines went dead, and something about the building's power systems began to fail one floor at a time. He also told us that a group of employees was held on the 25th floor, but it wasn't a conventional hostage situation. Rather, they were barricading themselves in an executive suite, terrified that the infected would break in. The original hostage crisis call might have been a misunderstanding, or maybe a frantic attempt to signal for help. As he spoke, I saw the color draining from his face. The wound on his arm was starting to throb. He mumbled about how he'd heard that infection spread quickly. Some people changed in less than an hour. Others took longer. He started to sway on his feet. Levinson immediately began providing first aid, cleaning the area as best he could, though we had limited supplies. The man's eyes locked on mine. "Please," he whispered. "Don't let me become one of them." We realized we had at least two crises on our hands. One was the immediate threat of the infected roaming the building. The other was the small group of survivors barricaded somewhere on the 25th floor. With communications down, we had no clue whether any rescue would come from the outside. We had to move methodically. Taylor kept a watch on the corridor to ensure no infection would catch us off guard. Cross went to check the conference rooms for any sign of survivors or supplies. Levinson stayed with our wounded companion, trying to keep him calm. I tried the office phone, but there was no tone. The lines were silent. Then the building shuddered again, a deep rumble echoing through the ductwork. It seemed like things outside were escalating. I knew if we stayed too long, we'd be trapped. But we also couldn't just leave everyone else. My training told me to maintain focus on the mission, keep negotiations open, locate potential hostages, and ensure the safety of as many lives as possible. The trouble was, how do you negotiate with a wave of infected individuals? We ventured further down the hallway, checking each office. Some were empty, and some were locked with no sign of life. The corridor lights flickered, and the hush of the air conditioning only amplified the unsettling quiet. Occasionally, a distant moan broke the silence, reminding us we weren't alone. We found a small break room with a shortwave radio on a table, presumably used by building security. I tried to tune it, hoping to reach anyone. Static, static, and then a crackle of distorted voices. Through the noise, I managed to catch a frantic broadcast. "Citywide crisis. Infected. Remain indoors if possible. Do not engage the infected unless necessary." Then, it dissolved back into static. I glanced at my team, each face reflecting a grim understanding. We were on our own. Taylor suggested we move systematically through the floor, room by room until we located the barricaded survivors. This would be time-consuming, but it was our best bet. However, we also had to consider the biting threat. Each confrontation with an infected individual could result in more injuries, or worse. Our wounded companion was already showing signs of discomfort, sweating profusely and occasionally murmuring about intense pain in his arm. While checking one of the corner offices, Cross called me over. He had discovered an elevator control panel that seemed to override some security features. The screen displayed a flashing error message about floors 1 through 23 being on containment lockdown. That might have explained why the stairwells were sealed, and it hinted at some kind of building-wide emergency protocol. It also meant that if we wanted to evacuate, we'd need to find a functional route. The main elevator we used earlier might still work, but it could also have been put under lockdown by now. We risked getting stuck between floors if the power failed again. I radioed any frequency I could think of, repeating a call for assistance. "This is Officer Mark Ramirez, SWAT hostage negotiator. We are on the 25th floor of the Lockwood building, requesting immediate backup. Infected individuals compromise the building. We have multiple wounded. Please respond." The only reply was a dull hiss. We eventually discovered signs of a makeshift barricade near the executive suite at the far end of the corridor. Desks and chairs blocked the doorway, piled to form a crude barrier. A handwritten note was taped to a door that read, "We're in here. Please help." We called out, identified ourselves, and asked if anyone could respond. A shaky voice from behind the barricade replied, "Who are you? Are you infected?" After some reassurance and a few negotiation techniques, the survivors on the other side began to shift furniture out of the way. Inside, we found about a dozen people huddled in a large executive office. They looked exhausted. Some had minor injuries. Others were simply in shock. An older gentleman, who seemed to be the manager, explained they had barricaded themselves once the infected started roaming the floor. He mentioned that earlier in the night, some security team members tried to help them, but communication fell apart, and people started disappearing. I glanced around the cramped space. The group had a small stash of snacks, bottled water, and a first aid kit that was already half used. They were relieved to see us, but I could see the desperation in their eyes. I asked if any of them had been bitten or showed symptoms. One woman raised her hand. Her sleeve was torn, revealing a shallow scrape that she said happened when she escaped an infected individual. She hadn't turned yet, but she was terrified that any contact with the infected might carry a risk. Our immediate goal became clear: find a way to evacuate these survivors. However, the building was in partial lockdown, floors below were likely swarming with infected, and we had no external support. It was starting to feel like the entire city outside might have been in an even worse situation. We considered the possibility of heading to the rooftop, hoping for a helicopter rescue. But a quick look at the building's security map revealed that roof access required a special key and code. Chances were it was at the security desk on the first floor, or with building management, and we had no way to confirm if anyone had it. Also, heading to the rooftop might trap us further if no rescue was coming. I paced in the small office, adrenaline surging. The longer we stayed put, the more we risked the infected breaking through any barricade we set up. People outside the doors could turn at any time, and I had our wounded companion to worry about. His complexion was growing paler, and he seemed dazed, as if he was losing touch with reality. In the background, I heard whimpers and whispered prayers. Some of the office workers clung to each other, eyes wide with dread. Every so often, the building groaned and the lights dimmed, only to surge back a moment later. Together with the manager of the office group and my SWAT teammates, we hatched a plan. We would divide into two groups. One group would stay in the barricaded suite under Cross's protection. The other group, myself, Taylor, Levinson, and a few able-bodied office workers, would try to reach a lower floor to find an alternative exit, or at least confirm if the main elevator could be forced to operate. Before we left, I asked the manager to seal the door behind us. I told him that if we didn't return in 2 hours, they should move somewhere else if they had the chance. He nodded, eyes filled with uncertainty. Sometimes, in negotiations, you promise everything will be fine, even when you're not sure. This was one of those moments where I could only offer a small measure of hope. We took flashlights and as many supplies as we could carry. The hallways were eerily empty. Along the way, we passed more signs of the infected: toppled filing cabinets, broken windows, sticky footprints and scattered belongings. It felt surreal, like stepping into a different world. Every noise made my pulse quicken. We found the elevator we had used earlier, but the panel displayed an emergency lockdown message. Taylor pried the doors open. To our relief, the elevator car was on the 25th floor, but when we tried to power it up, the console beeped ominously. The building's lockdown seemed to have disabled it. We stood at the open threshold, peering down the dim elevator shaft, not sure if we dared climb. Time was slipping away. We could hear distant shuffles and moans echoing from the lower floors, indicating the infected might be creeping upward. I took a deep breath, stepping back from the elevator shaft. My mind raced with possible solutions. We considered returning to the barricaded suite to regroup, but that would mean we'd be completely trapped if the infected reached us. At that moment, a faint sound came from our shortwave radio. All units, crisis, city, remain safe. Possible rescue missions will commence once the threat is contained. The voice sounded strained and uncertain, as if it came from a small outpost of law enforcement, desperately trying to keep it together. Even though it was only a few words, it reminded me we weren't alone in this. The entire city was facing the same problem: zombies, infected, or whatever we wanted to call them. We made the call to return to the suite. We had no choice but to barricade ourselves with the other survivors and hope that rescue or a break in the chaos would come. On our way back, we noticed more doors forced open and more signs of scuffles. We even spotted a figure crawling at the far end of a hallway, letting out a long, drawn-out moan before disappearing around a corner. My heart pounded against my ribcage. When we reached the barricaded suite, Cross let us in. He looked relieved but shaken. Apparently something had pounded on the door for a few minutes while we were gone, then shuffled away. The survivors looked at me expectantly, eyes brimming with desperate hope. I had to fight the urge to say something comforting that might be a lie. We reinforced the barricade with additional furniture, anything we could move. Some of the survivors took turns keeping watch, while others tried to rest. I found a seat near the window, gazing down at the streets below. Even from the 25th floor, I could see flickers of chaos, columns of smoke, the distant shimmer of emergency lights, and irregular shapes moving in the dark. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a rescue helicopter in the distance, but it never came closer. Our wounded companion sat against the wall, shivering. I kneeled beside him, and he seemed barely lucid. He managed to mumble a few words about his family before drifting into a strained sleep. I fought back a knot in my throat. There was nothing more we could do for him with our limited supplies. And so, there we were, 12 hours since we first arrived at the Lockwood building, convinced we were dealing with a standard hostage crisis. Instead, we found ourselves in the middle of a citywide outbreak. Zombies. Infected. Whatever the official term would be, the reality was simple. One bite could change a person's life forever. The corridors of the building were no longer just walls and doors. They were the front lines of a terrifying new conflict. That's where my story pauses, at least for now. Our small group remained behind those barricades, hoping someone would break through the chaos to find us. Whether that happened or not, I can't say. I can only share these first 12 hours because even those feel surreal, like a long, feverish dream. Yet I know they were real. I can still smell the stale air and taste the desperation whenever I close my eyes. If you're out there reading this, know that you aren't alone. We're all in this together, whether we're SWAT negotiators, office workers, or just frightened folks trying to survive. We didn't choose this, but we can choose to keep going, to keep believing that somewhere, somehow, there's still a spark of hope that will guide us out of this darkness. Listen carefully to every radio broadcast, watch each other's backs, and never let the infected catch you off guard. Our world is different now. The rules have changed, but we're still here, and we're still fighting. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know that sharing our stories might help us hold on to our humanity. That's why I'm telling mine to you. in case it provides even a flicker of light in this long, dark night. Stay safe, survivors, and may we find a way forward, together. Thanks for watching. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button and subscribe for more eerie creepypastas. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.